All right, so now it's time for Act 2 of Lord Edgware Dies by Dame Agatha Christie, where we launch into the murder investigation. So as I said at the end of the last part, Lord Edgware was found dead that next morning with a stab wound to the base of the skull. So, Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, who is a frenemy of Poirot, he appears in many of the Poirot novels, sometimes in a friendly capacity towards Poirot and sometimes in an adversarial capacity. And he announces that Lord Edgware was found dead that morning, and that says that he was killed by Jane Wilkinson, that she had been let in around 10 p.m. by the butler and was seen by Miss Carroll, Lord Edgware's secretary, when she went into his study. Lord Edgware was last seen alive at 9 p.m. when his butler had removed his dinner plate from the study. And when the butler had gone upstairs to bed at 11 p.m., the study light was already off. So at the time, the butler assumed that Lord Edgware had already gone upstairs. But it's now assumed that his death occurred sometime between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., and most likely after 10, when Jane Wilkinson went into was let into the house and went into his study alone. So later that day, Brian Martin comes over, and he again is saying that he is sure that Jane Wilkinson committed this murder, but she's not responsible for it because she has no sense of morality. Later that day, the society page shows that Jane Wilkinson was at a party given by Sir Montague, and that there were 13 people at the party. And one of the guests, Mr. Donald Ross, who's an aspiring actor, says that she went out briefly to take a phone call. So Poirot goes and asks Jane Wilkinson again. She does not really care about Lord Edgware dying. She's very happy because now she's free to marry the Duke of Merton. But she does say that she went to the party, that she originally was not going to go to the party, but she changed her mind at the last minute. And she's glad that she did because now she has an alibi for the murder. But she went out and she received a phone call from someone with a foreign-sounding voice, asking if Lady Edgware was there. So now that Poirot and Hastings know that Jane Wilkinson was apparently at two places at the same time last night, they go over to Lord Edgware's house to assess the veracity of the testimony provided that Jane Wilkinson was there. There's more credence to Jane Wilkinson having been at the party because she was with 13 people the whole time. And apparently only 2 people saw Jane Wilkinson at Lord Edgware's house. So when they go, they speak with the butler who let her in and only saw her briefly, and her face was partially covered by a hat. And then we have Miss Carroll, who is Lord Edgware's secretary, and she's been working for him for a long time. She's very efficient, very well trusted, and seemed to be respected by those who knew him. And she is sure that it was Jane Wilkinson. She said that she saw her face clearly. She could not see by the body language and everything else. But Poirot does a little experiment where he has Hastings up in the part of the house where Miss Carroll saw Jane Wilkinson from. And Hastings is able to indicate that he cannot clearly see Poirot's face. So it calls into question Miss Carroll's testimony that she still clearly saw Jane. At this point, we're pretty sure that it was really Carlotta Adams that came to Lord Edgware's house that night. And so we have to ask ourselves, did she come of her own volition, or was she put up to it by someone? And why? The real murderer, perhaps. And so he goes over to Carlotta Adams' flat and finds that she had been found dead earlier that day. She had a fatal overdose of Veronal, which is a barbiturate drug that was used for like anxiety and sleep. And in her purse was like a small bag that was engraved CA and a letter from someone from Paris. Um, and in it was several Veronal tablets. So it does seem that she was a regular user, but her maid says that that cannot be the case. So Poirot and Hastings then go and see Adam's good friend, Jenny Driver, who owns a hat shop in London. And she also indicates that she does not believe that that Carlotta Adams had any type of drug habit, that she was a very straightforward, very responsible type of person. She had a younger sister whom she was trying to take care of, and that this younger sister had recently been in Paris of note. And but her younger sister was now back in the United States, I believe in New York City. And what Jenny Driver also shares is that a few days prior to the murder, or murders at this point, Carlotta Adams had come to her asking for a hat that could obscure the left side of her face. And the reason for this seems to be that Jane Wilkinson had a distinctive mole on the left side of her face. So Poirot later goes to Sir Montague's house and interviews him and the servants. And one of the butlers does say that he was the one that answered the phone when there was a phone call for Lady Edgware, and that he went and got her, and that when he had spoken to the person, it sounded like a woman, and that she had a foreign accent with prominent R's. So perhaps an American, maybe even Carlotta Adams or someone else. So then Poirot also looks into the motives of other people who may want to kill Lord Edgware. And of course, there's his family members. So Lord Edgware's estate is entailed, and his nephew, Captain Ronald Marsh, will inherit the title as well as the bulk of the estate. Geraldine, his daughter, will inherit the rest of the estate, the part that isn't entailed, barring £500 that will go to Miss Carroll. Now, Ronald Marsh and Geraldine were at the opera on the night of the murder. Geraldine does kind of have a bit of a fit and says that she's happy that her father died, that he was oppressive, and she's just relieved to be rid of him. Captain Marsh is very blasé and almost goading with Poirot about his activities and how it has an airtight alibi for the murder, even though he does benefit from the death. So Poirot later visits the apparent fiancé of Jane Wilkinson, the Duke of Merton, and the Duke of Merton refuses to admit to any type of engagement or any of his activities, but he apparently was in Paris at the time of the murder. But could he have sent, Carlotta Adams to do it himself? We don't know. But as Poirot is leaving, the Duke of Merton's mother, the Dowager Duchess, approaches Poirot and asks him to persuade her son not to marry Jane Wilkinson. And we think of this as, obviously she's very old school. She wants her son to marry someone of noble birth, and definitely not an American. So, but then everything gets turned on its head when suddenly a taxi driver comes forward, and he says that he picked up Geraldine Marsh and Captain Ronald Marsh from the opera just before 11 o'clock. And they went to the house, went in, came back outside, and then had him take them back to the opera. So at this point, it's seeming like they may have gone to kill Lord Edgware after having placed Jane Wilkinson at the scene to frame her. So now it's time for my prediction as to the identity of the murderer after Act 2, where we've gotten started in the investigation. with this new information, as I said, it seems to be pointing towards Captain Marsh and Geraldine, the two cousins. But I'm not convinced. I'm still leaning towards it really being Brian Martin as the murderer, um, or even Jane Wilkinson. So here's my reasoning. Everyone assumes that the murder took place before 11 p.m. because that's when the butler went up, and apparently no one else came into the house, or no one else was let into the house. But how do we know that we don't have extra keys? And maybe Brian Martin used Carlotta Adams' impersonation skills to get into the house and get another copy of the key, and come in later after everyone had gone to bed. Or maybe Jane Wilkinson had a key from when she was married to Lord Edgware, and she came in later that night, so she was able to give herself an alibi by having herself be at two places that were the same for Brian Moss, and he's using, Carlotta Adams to frame Jane Wilkinson. And now that he didn't know that she was going to be at that party, he ended up killing Carlotta Adams in order to cover up plot to frame Jane Wilkinson for the murder of Lord Edgware. So for me, I'm going to say that my main suspect right now is primarily Brian Martin. But I do think that actually Jane Wilkinson could have done it as well.